The STAX S5 are not for the faint-hearted. That's because the focus here is on their sound quality with their planar magnetic drivers. And they're promising delicious, clean audiophile sound, so we're gonna see if they deliver, or hear if they deliver. But I'll cover all the basic features of the headphone first. If you wanna skip to sound quality, timestamps are below, go for it. So let's start with the build and the fit. So these headphones weigh in at 350 grams, so they have some weight to them. This is due to planar magnetic drivers being just heavier drivers and requiring more power as well. So they chucked in a 1500 milliamp hour battery, which is of course gonna add to the weight. But that's gonna give you 80 hours of battery life, and that's with Edifier's test at 80% volume using the AAC codec. So kudos to Edifier. Most brands usually test their battery at 50% volume with SBC as a codec since it's less power hungry. So with those drivers and all the battery in there, it's a pretty heavy headphone and it is built pretty well. With decent hard plastics used, you get a textured finish on the outer ear cup and a metal finish on the headband. And that headband holds shape well when extended out. And the adjustment of the headband feels okay. Each adjustment locks in place well enough, so you shouldn't accidentally move it out of place too often. I think there could have been more cushioning on the headband, but there's enough. So the build is fine. It definitely doesn't reflect the price tag, but it's sturdy, it's a simple, clean design. And if the focus here is directed to the sound quality and the drivers, that's a worthy trade-off. They didn't skimp on earpad quality though, so this is genuine leather. It's on the firmer side. I have pretty large ears and they're super comfortable for me. I do feel the weight of the headphones when I'm wearing them, but I can wear them for hours on end with no issues. I get no ear, neck, or jaw fatigue. I think the clamping force could have been a bit tighter. I have a pretty huge head and it's just tight enough for me. And they do get slightly warm, mainly with the leather earpads, but this does mean you get pretty decent passive noise isolation with them. And they also included some mesh earpads, which are super easy to take on and off. And they're much cooler, but do leak in more sound. This will also change the sound quality of the headphones since the mesh earpads are slightly more shallow, but you can compensate for this change in the app nice and easily. Now you also get a high quality hard case included. It's a bit of a chunky one, but it's nice and firm and large enough so I don't have to fold the headphones in to fit in the case. I can just leave them set for my giant head setting, which I really like. Some cable management would have been nice, like some mesh, but you can still fit in a USB-C cable and aux cable if needed. And those are included in the box as well. The aux cable has a nice fabric finish, and you also get a 3.5mm to 1/4 inch adapter. They also chucked in a pick to unclip the earpads, which I didn't really need to use. But they do give you a USB-C to USB-A cable, which is a bit strange because you're actually able to use USB-C to USB-C for audio, not just with the auxiliary cable. But any old USB-C cable works just fine. Still, USB-C audio, it's a great feature to have. It is pretty rare with headphones. The only issue, I was testing it on my Asus Zenfone 10 and I had to crank the volume pretty loud, close to 80% for like decent listening, where when I tested it on my iPhone 15 Pro, that 80% volume on the Zenfone was equivalent to about 50% volume on my iPhone. This isn't an issue with the auxiliary connection though, as you actually control the volume separate on the headphones than to your phone, where with USB-C, you only change it on your phone. And when it comes to sound quality, it was the same if I used USB-C or auxiliary. The only real issue here is that you have to have the headphones powered on to use USB-C or auxiliary. So if the battery is dead, you can't use your headphones with a wire. But a unique feature of using USB-C is that you can still control your media playback using the controls on the headphones. So you can play, pause, adjust volume, and skip tracks forward and back. Track forward is set to a long hold. On volume down though, track back is volume up, which feels kind of backwards. And this is the same when using them wirelessly. You can also summon your voice assistant with a double tap on the play pause button when using Bluetooth. And you can double tap the pairing button to turn on the low latency gaming mode. And single tapping that button will switch between the stock EQ, dynamic EQ, and monitor EQ. You can do this wired or with Bluetooth, but you just don't get a voice prompt stating what mode is on. You just hear the same beep when switching between the three. Would have been nice to have a voice prompt on there. But you can of course listen to how the sound quality change, and you can generally gauge what setting is going to be on. You can also customize a single and double tap of this multifunction button in the app. So you can choose what EQs you want to cycle through. You can change it to game mode, voice assistant, or the earpad switch. The only thing missing here is wearing detection. So like your music won't automatically pause or play when you take the headphones on and off. But again, if they're putting the money into the sound, that's completely fair. But that focus on sound does continue with the amount of codecs that you're getting. You're pretty much getting all of them. So Bluetooth 5.4, SBC, AAC, LDAC, aptX adaptive lossless, and LHDC. No LE audio, but that's still not really a thing anyway. But yeah, first time on any Bluetooth wireless earbud or headphone that you're getting LHDC and LDAC and aptX adaptive lossless. Now, I honestly don't think using lossless, LHDC and LDAC makes a massive difference, but look, it's there if you need. You also get multi-point connection here, so you can have two devices connected to the headphones at the same time. You just need to pause your playback on one device before you play it on your other device for that audio to kick in. And you can't use LDAC with multi-point connection turned on, but you can use aptX adaptive high res and lossless. That is a benefit of the aptX adaptive codec. And when it comes to latency, like watching videos and movies, completely fine, that's never an issue today. When it comes to gaming, even with the low latency mode off, it was pretty low in my test on my iPhone 15 Pro. If you're gonna be using aptX adaptive on an Android device, it's probably gonna be even lower. And when I turned the low latency gaming mode on, I didn't notice much of a difference, which is good because the latency was already fine. So you don't really have to use that. If you're gaming anyway, you're really into your shooters, you can just use the headphones with a wire. But now let's talk about the call quality. So you're not getting noise canceling, but they're still chucked in some microphones so you can hear your voice on a phone call. So I normally run through 3 tests: a quiet room, some simulation crowd noise, and a simulation windy city with construction noise, which is a very tricky test. And they perform quite well in all the tests. The wind tests, they do struggle a little bit, but for headphone standards, it's pretty decent. You just can't mute your microphone when using the controls on the headphones. But here are some samples compared to the Soundcore Space One Pro I recently reviewed, which currently have the best call quality for headphones that I've tested. Here are the samples. All right, here's the Edifier STAX Spirit S5 in a quiet room. All right, here's the call quality of the Soundcore Space One Pro in a quiet room. All right, so now we're going to test how the microphones block out some simulation crowd noise. All right, here's the Edifier STAX Spirit S5 with some simulation crowd noise. All right, here's the Soundcore Space One Pro with some simulation crowd noise. All right, now I've got some city noise, some construction noise, and some simulation wind. All right, here's the Edifier STAX Spirit S5 with some city noise, construction noise, and simulation wind. All right, here's Soundcore Space One Pro with some city noise, construction noise, and simulation noise. All right, now before we run through sound quality, let's quickly touch up on the app. So you can get the Edifier Connects app on iOS or Android. And it's a simple and reliable app. You have your headphone battery on the main page. You have the ear cup setting adjustment. Next is sound effects, which gives you 4 preset EQs, and you get a 4-band EQ in there as well with Q factor adjustment and individual frequency adjustment for each band. There's also a game mode toggle on the home page, and that settings tab on the top right will have all your smaller extras, like your control settings, voice prompt volume, auto power off, Bluetooth settings, and a factory reset. So look, pretty simple app, but you get the main features here. But now before we talk about the sound, I'll quickly touch up on sound leakage. I normally don't really notice too much of an issue with sound leakage with most of the noise canceling headphones I tested, but the leakage here is on the moderate side. So past 60% volume, if you're in a quiet room, it's going to be quite noticeable with whoever's next to you. And in my max volume test, I've got 94 decibels. So pretty decent max volume here. This is not tested with a seal, so it's not like the true decibels, but it gives me a comparison between all the headphones that I've tested. And I did find myself listening around 70% was kind of the sweet spot for me, where normally it's about 60%. So anyway, above 85% volume is when it starts to get pretty loud, kind of in hearing loss territory. So you get plenty of volume here. And if you want to crank these at those really high volumes, I noticed no distortion. But now onto the reason you're probably going to buy these headphones, the actual sound quality. And these have the most standout tuning that I've heard in a headphone or even an earbud. Now, I wouldn't call myself an audiophile. I'm a little bit of a bass head. Like my go-to tuning is like, give me a decent amount of bass, but I want to retain as much mid-range and treble clarity as possible. So this is quite a different tuning to what I'm used to because I'm mainly reviewing like consumer headphones, noise canceling earbuds, that kind of stuff. So I'll give you a quick explanation of how I interpret the sound and go in more detail later. So the stock tuning out of the box with no EQ customization is super balanced. The bass is on the flatter side, but still has a nice punch to it. Definitely not lacking though. There's a tasteful amount of sub bass and mid bass, but overall it's refined. The mids are great, both male and female vocals stood out really well. I'd say these headphones favor female vocals or any vocals in a higher range. So male vocals, deeper voices, came across ever so slightly thin, but overall it's a clean experience. Your vocals sound nice and clean. But the treble is by far the standout feature of this tuning. It's both precise, detailed, with some really excellent upper treble sparkle. And the soundstage is definitely on the more open side. I'd kind of combine that with the treble that they've used in their tuning and the slightly deeper ear cups. I actually got my girlfriend to try these headphones and she never experienced an open soundstage and hated it. She's been using the Audio-Technica M50X for like 8 years and they're quite a shallow ear cup. So she was like confused. She was like, why does it sound like the speakers are far away from me? So open soundstage. Maybe not everyone likes it. that's what you're getting. My only complaint with the sound here is that the treble can get a little bit over the top, not necessarily harsh, but just a bit overpowering, a little bit too much for my personal taste. So for long listening sessions, I'd say that would get pretty fatiguing. So my go-to EQ is just the dynamic preset, which subtly boosts the bass and dials down the treble. So for me, it works really well. I don't even have to worry about using the 4-band EQ, but if you want to, you have your Q factor adjustment in there. You can adjust the frequency of each band. It's a very decent EQ. The monitor preset is more of a flat response, best used for monitoring. But going back to the dynamic EQ, what a tuning. You still get that clean punchy bass, it's just a little bit more sub bass and mid bass, which is definitely going to work better with electronic music. Also found listening to hard rock and metal, things like the double kicks, distortion in guitars stood out a little bit better. But the standout is still the treble, super detailed, the same upper treble sparkle is there. It's just dialed down slightly like I said, so it doesn't get too harsh. And for longer listening sessions, this is going to be a more suitable sound. Now, when I first used these headphones, even with the dynamic EQ on, it took me a while to actually get used to this type of sound because this is a type of tuning that's going to be for more intricate listening where you really want to hear more finer details in your music. Now, I mainly listen to like hard rock, metal, melodic techno, and I was comparing these to a headphone I just reviewed, the Soundcore Space One Pro, which has pretty decent sound. It's definitely on the bassier side though. Now, not really a fair comparison because they're about half the price and they're like a consumer headphone with noise cancelling and all these extra features. But I think this is a good comparison if you're someone who hasn't actually delved into these kind of more expensive audiophile type headphones. So some characteristics of sound that really stand out on the S5 compared to most kind of slightly more V-shaped headphones or whatever audio products would be things like the pluck of an acoustic guitar, just has more realism, more texture to it. Enter Sandman by Metallica is one of my go-to testing songs. I noticed things in the intro, just like the reverb that actually used on the drums in that intro really stood out, and the thick bass line behind it. I also noticed the dynamics of the hi-hat stand out more. And an album I've been listening to non-stop since it came out is Time 2 by Winter Sun. If you're a music lover and you haven't heard of Winter Sun, check out Winter Sun, especially their latest album, Time 2. But if you don't know, the main guy in that band kind of mixes and masters the songs and is obviously really into his audio. But anyway, with that album, there's just so much going on, intricate percussion, orchestration, you've got these Japanese instruments and there's just things going on all over the place and it just sounds amazing on the S5. And that kind of links me back to why I think the treble is a standout, because I think that's where a lot of that detail really lies. And I'm talking about more percussion and like acoustic guitars. So like anything in a higher frequency, orchestration, horns. I'm a drummer, or like used to be. So I like picking out things like intricate hi-hat and ride patterns in the chaos of metal. Oh, I'm wearing a metal shirt. I just realized. Machine Head, another goodie. All I wear is band shirts. So you probably tell. If you're like, I don't wear them for these videos, it's just all I own is band shirts. Let me know if you're the same. But going back to the S5, it's the details, it's the intricacies that if you really want to like intricately listen and just focus on certain aspects of a song, that's where a pair like the S5 is going to be right down your alley. But even then, going back to the Soundcore Space One Pro, you can still hear details and intricacies. It's just on another level on a pair like the S5. Because I know a lot of people that would prefer the sound of the Soundcore Space One Pro. Like this is more audiophile focused, it's for more enthusiasts, but I still think most people will appreciate the sound once you kind of get used to it.